Ron Perryman knew where his life as a drug dealer and addict was leading. He was just too high to care.
I knew I was not doing the right thing, and I always knew that if I died, I was going to hell.
He knew because as a pastor's son, he had been held to a strict standard of right and wrong.
I was required to do certain things as a preacher's kid. I had to act a certain way. I guess I kind of started resenting that a little bit.
Ron started drinking in junior high and hanging around with older kids.
I definitely wanted their approval and wanted to fit in with the older kids and be able to do what they were doing. And it felt good, getting drunk and high. If sin wasn't fun, nobody would want to do it.
By high school, he was also using drugs, skipping school, and was arrested 3 times for DUIs.
It was a very tense situation at home. I was so rebellious that I didn't want to hear anything they had to say. I didn't want to do anything they wanted to do. I just wanted to do what I wanted to do.
Ron dropped out of high school, worked various jobs, and at 19 was introduced to methamphetamine.
Even though I knew what I should be doing spiritually from the way my parents raised me, I just let the meth control my thinking, control my life. So I started selling meth, and that way I could do what I wanted, when I wanted, and at the same time, make some pretty good money. I did very quickly start getting a sense of power. It made me feel like people did need me. They needed me for their drugs.
Several years later, Ron was indicted by the FBI for drug trafficking. By then, Ron didn't care how his choices were affecting himself or those who loved him.
Well, I must say it was very difficult to cope with. And even though you spend time in prayer and trust in the Lord to bring him back in his timing, Ronnie sort of, in my opinion, went from bad to worse.
I was working part-time with the Sheriff's Department during the time that he was being in prison. And I was the one that had to take him into jail and sign him in. And that was one of the hardest things that I've ever done.
I was just concerned about doing what I wanted to do.
He was released after 3.5 years. Not only did he go back to selling and using meth, he started cooking it himself. Ron continued in that lifestyle for 14 years, gunning between 4 meth labs in as many South Carolina counties. Then in 2012, he was busted for drug manufacturing and given 5 years. At the time, a number of his friends had recently died, many from drug addiction.
I just felt like there was a feeling of death all around me all the time, whether I was high or not. And it really bothered me.
2 months into his sentence, Ron went to a jail Bible study just to get a break from his cell. Instead, he was faced with the truth of who he had become.
All of my past, the drugs, all of my sins, everything just kind of overwhelmed me for some reason all of a sudden. And I knew at that moment that all I had to do was ask and accept Jesus, and that I would be forgiven. I got on my knees in that prison cell, and I said, God, I just give it all to you. I know I've messed my life up, and I want you to take over. And he took over. I had an amazing feeling of peace come over me. The looming feeling of death that was still surrounding me even when I went into prison was just gone. The desire, which I still had, even though I was locked up to do meth, was gone. God performed a miracle in my life.
Ron spent his remaining time in prison seeking what he'd ignored his whole life.
Of course, I had a lot of time on my hands being in prison, so I spent a lot of time in the Word.
Granted parole in 2014, Ron walked out of prison with a renewed heart and mind. He now has a great relationship with his parents. Ron later married Lisa and says he's come to know true freedom.
All of my need for acceptance from other people just was gone. Even though I'm still not proud of what I did for the majority of my life, I don't have to be ashamed of it anymore. I like who I am. I like who God is making me, and He's still working on me every day.